Our history books open with a clear beginning, a line drawn in the Mesopotamian sand where civilization is said to have been born. But what if that line is not a starting point, but an echo? What if, buried beneath millions of years of rock and silence, lie the ghosts of other worlds, other humanities that rose and fell long before our own? This is the question posed by the Silurian hypothesis, a chilling scientific inquiry that asks whether an industrial civilization could have existed in the deep past and then vanished so completely that even the planet has forgotten it. The Earth is a relentless recycler. Over geological time, mountains crumble, oceans are subducted, and continents drift, wiping the slate clean. Any direct evidencities, bones, machines, would have been ground back into dust and stone. The search, therefore, is not for ruins, but for planetary fingerprints called technosignatures. These could be strange chemical spikes in ancient rock layers, anomalous isotope ratios that mimic nuclear activity, or sudden changes in atmospheric composition preserved in polar ice, all hinting at a forgotten industrial age. We are sifting through the planet's oldest memories, looking for a story that has been almost entirely erased, a story that asks if we are the first to call this world home, or merely the latest. We live our lives on a stage we believe to be solid, permanent, and still. We look upon the mountains and see eternity. We build our cities from steel and concrete, monuments to our own endurance, believing they will stand as a testament to our existence for ages to come. We measure our history in the reigns of kings and the rise of empires, a few thousand years that feel like a great and profound length of time. From this human vantage point, the world appears to be a stable archive, a library of stone that faithfully keeps a record of what has been. But this perception, this comforting illusion of permanence, is perhaps the greatest fiction we have ever told ourselves. To truly begin the search for those who may have come before, we must first understand the language of our planet, a language not of memory, but of erasure. We must learn to see the Earth not as a static archive, but as a living, breathing, and relentlessly destructive machine. The true scale of our planet's story is a concept, so vast it borders on the incomprehensible. It is called deep time. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old. To grasp this immensity, imagine that entire history compressed into a single calendar year. On this scale, the first complex life would appear sometime in September. The dinosaurs would roam the Earth for a little over a week in mid-December, and the whole of recorded human history, from the first Sumerian scripts to the satellites now orbiting our world, would occupy only the last 14 seconds before midnight on December 31st. Our entire civilization is a fleeting spark in a great and ancient darkness. A civilization that lasted for 10,000 years before vanishing would represent just a fraction of one of those final seconds, a brief flash in the planetary year now. Imagine what happens to the physical evidence of that flash. Leave one of our modern cities to its own devices, and nature begins the process of reclamation almost immediately. Within a few years, plants would grow through cracks in the pavement, their roots lifting sidewalks. Within decades, moisture and temperature changes would cause the rebar inside our concrete to corrode and expand, cracking our skyscrapers from within. After a few centuries, most buildings would collapse, their steel skeletons rusted into heaps of debris. In a few thousand years, a new forest would stand where a metropolis once hummed, the outlines of roads and foundations visible only as faint, geometric scars upon the land. And after a million years of wind, rain, and ice, of shifting soils and relentless vegetation, even those scars would be gone. The city would be nothing more than a strange, compressed layer of sediment, its materials weathered, crushed, and scattered, almost indistinguishable from the natural rock around it. Our legacy, for all its seeming permanence, is profoundly fragile. Time doesn't just pass, it acts. It buries, it melts, it crushes, and it erases. But the slow, patient work of weathering and erosion is only the surface of the Earth's great recycling program. The planet itself is not a solid ball of rock. It is a dynamic engine. Its outer shell is a patchwork of immense plates, floating and grinding against each other on a slow-moving sea of molten rock. This is the process of plate tectonics, and it is the planet's primary mechanism for forgetting. As these plates collide, they raise mountains. As they pull apart, they open new oceans. And in the most powerful act of erasure, they slide beneath one another in a process called subduction. Subduction is the Earth's ultimate recycling system. It is where the planet's crust is dragged back down into the fiery heat of the mantle to be melted and remade. This process is most active on the ocean floor. The sea floor is not a permanent feature. It is constantly being born at mid-ocean ridges and consumed at deep ocean trenches. The average age of the entire ocean floor is only about 200 million years. This means that any evidence of a civilization, any artifact, any ruin, any chemical trace that settled on the ocean floor more than 200 million years ago is simply gone. It has not been buried. It has been unmade, melted back into the planet's interior, its atoms recycled into new rock, turning slowly into magma. It is the most complete form of destruction imaginable, an erasure so total that it leaves not even a ghost behind. Continental surfaces last longer, but they are subject to their own forms of violent revision. Over hundreds of millions of years, continents drift, collide, and break apart, raising and destroying mountain ranges. Glaciers advance and retreat, scraping the land clean down to the bedrock. Volcanoes erupt, burying entire landscapes under hundreds of feet of ash and lava. Rivers change their course, carving new canyons and wiping away the old floodplains. The very face of the world is completely remade every few hundred million years. To survive this endless geological churn is not the default. It is a miracle. The Grand Canyon, often seen as a great geological archive, is a book with missing chapters. There are great gaps in its layers, known as unconformities, where millions of years of rock were either never deposited or were laid down and then scoured away by erosion before the next layer formed. The Earth, it turns out, does not keep a perfect diary. It is an archive full of holes, a memory that is constantly rewriting itself. It is this reality that brings us to the most common question: why have we not found the bones or the fossils of these potential past civilizations? The answer lies in the profound rarity of fossilization itself. We often picture the fossil record as a comprehensive library of past life, but it is more like a few scattered and partially burned pages from a book with most of its chapters ripped out. When an organism dies, it is almost always consumed, decomposed, and dissolved, its constituent parts recycled back into the ecosystem. For fossilization to occur, a series of improbable events must align perfectly. The remains must be buried rapidly in sediment, protecting them from scavengers and decay. The surrounding environment must be right for the organic material in the bones to be slowly replaced by minerals, turning them to stone. That rock must then survive for millions of years without being subducted, melted, or crushed by tectonic forces. And finally, after all that, it must be re-exposed on the surface by erosion at the precise moment when someone is there to find it. Fossilization is not the rule. It is an extraordinary exception. Most organisms that have ever lived left no trace at all. It is estimated that we have found fossils for less than 1% of all the species that have ever existed. Now consider the implications for a technological civilization. If the bones of living creatures, durable and designed by nature to last, are so rarely preserved, what are the chances for the artifacts of a civilization? What are the odds of a building, a tool, or a machine surviving this geological gauntlet? Most metals corrode and rust away. Plastics, for all their seeming permanence, break down over thousands of years when exposed to sunlight and geological pressures. Even concrete, if left unprotected, eventually crumbles and dissolves. The challenge is almost insurmountable. It's not simply that we haven't found the ruins of a 50-million-year-old city. It is that the odds of any such ruin surviving in a recognizable form are vanishingly, almost impossibly, small. The Earth, through its own natural, indifferent, and ceaseless processes, is an efficient machine for forgetting. It grinds down the evidence of the past, swallows it, and forges it into the raw material of the future. The silence in the geological record, that vast, deep quiet that stretches back beyond the reach of our own history, is not necessarily a silence of absence. It may be the silence of erasure. To search for a civilization that came before us is to search for a whisper in a storm, a footprint on a shifting shoreline. To have any hope of finding it, we must abandon the search for the things we know would not survive. We cannot look for their cities, their machines, or their bodies. We must look for the only thing that might endure, the faint, chemical stain, the planetary fingerprint that their existence may have left upon the world itself. We must search for the ghost in the machine. The verdict of deep time is absolute. The relentless churn of geology, the slow grind of erosion, the fiery consumption of the planet's crust, these are the forces that have decreed the erasure of the past. If a civilization existed in the deep history of our world, its cities have been ground to dust, its monuments have been swallowed by the mantle, and its bones have been dissolved into the sea. A search for a 50-million-year-old ruin is a search for a ghost in a world that has been bulldozed, rebuilt, and bulldozed again 100 times over. The direct evidence is gone. The book of their history has been burned. But what if, in the ashes, a few words remain? What if a civilization, in the very act of living and growing, leaves behind a more subtle and enduring legacy? Not a monument, but a planetary scar. Not an artifact, but a chemical ghost. This is the new paradigm, the foundation of the Silurian hypothesis. The search must turn away from the tangible and toward the trace. It must become a planetary-scale forensic investigation, sifting not through ruins, but through the very layers of rock and ice for the faint, indelible fingerprints that a technologically advanced society would inevitably leave on its world. These are technosignatures, anomalies in the geological record so strange, so abrupt, and so widespread that they are difficult to explain through the slow, natural rhythms of the earth. The hunt is no longer for a needle in a haystack. It is for a change in the very chemistry of the hay itself. We must become detectives of deep time, and our first clue lies in the most fundamental element of life. Carbon. Every moment of our industrial age is being written into the planet's permanent record with a very specific ink. That ink is carbon. For billions of years, the Earth has maintained a delicate balance, cycling carbon between the atmosphere the oceans, the rocks, and life itself. This natural cycle uses a specific form of carbon, one that has been an active part of the biosphere. But when we burn fossil fuels, the compressed remains of ancient life, of forests and plankton buried for hundreds of millions of years, we are digging up carbon from the deep past and releasing it into the present. This ancient carbon is chemically different. It has a distinct isotopic signature. It is depleted in the heavier carbon-13 and the radioactive carbon-14 isotopes. When we release it, we change the isotopic ratio of the entire atmosphere. This change, known as the Seuss effect, is the unmistakable fingerprint of our industrial civilization. Future geologists, millions of years from now, could drill into a glacier or a layer of sedimentary rock, measure the carbon isotopes, and see the sudden, dramatic spike that marks our time on Earth. With this knowledge, we can look back. We can read the carbon signatures of the past and ask, has this happened before? The geological record answers with a chilling ambiguity. 56 million years ago, the planet experienced a sudden and dramatic convulsion known as the Paleocene thermal maximum, or PETIMI. Over a period of just a few thousand years, a geological colossal amount of carbon flooded into the atmosphere. Global temperatures soared by 5 to 8 degrees Celsius. The oceans became acidic, triggering a mass extinction of deep-sea life. In rock layers from this period, all around the world, there is a sharp, negative spike in carbon-13 isotopes, a signature that looks hauntingly familiar. It is the same kind of isotopic shift we are creating today. The conventional scientific explanation for the PETM is the sudden release of methane hydrates from the ocean floor, a natural but catastrophic event. And it may well be the correct answer. But the Silurian hypothesis forces us to ask the question, does this event, so similar in its chemical signature to our own industrial age, represent the footprint of a predecessor? Could the PETM have been an ancient industrial age, a civilization that powered itself, as we do, by burning the buried remains of a world even more ancient than their own? We cannot know, but the fingerprint in the stone is there, a perfect match for a crime that was, until now, believed to have been committed only once. And the PETM is not the only such event. Go back further, to 252 million years ago, and we find a far more terrifying anomaly. This is the boundary of the Permian-Triassic extinction, an event known as the Great Dying. It was the most profound catastrophe in the history of complex life. Over 90% of all marine species and 70% of terrestrial life vanished. The planet was nearly sterilized. The prime suspect has long been a series of immense volcanic eruptions in the Siberian traps. But when geologists examine the carbon record from this boundary, they find a signature that, once again, mirrors the massive combustion of fossil fuels. The scale of the carbon release required to create this signature is almost unimaginable, an event that would dwarf even our own current emissions, suggesting a global process of combustion that lasted for millennia. Could such a profound global catastrophe, which so closely mimics the predicted consequences of our own industrial activity, have been the final, terrible act of a forgotten civilization? The evidence is ambiguous, a chemical ghost that could point to a natural disaster, or to something else entirely. The fingerprints of a civilization would not be limited to carbon. The very act of building, of manufacturing, of harnessing power, is an alchemical process. It involves purifying and concentrating elements that are naturally rare, and creating new materials and isotopes that nature itself never would. These artificial substances, too, could leave their trace. Our own nuclear age, for example, has left an indelible mark. Above-ground nuclear testing in the mid-20th century scattered artificial radioactive isotopes across the entire globe. Elements like plutonium-239, which is virtually non-existent in nature, can now be found in a thin, global layer in soils and ice cores. These isotopes will remain detectable for tens of thousands of years, a clear and unambiguous marker of our technological coming of age. The question, then, is a simple one. Are there other such layers? The answer may lie in a strange discovery made in Oklo, in Gabon, Africa. There, in a uranium deposit, scientists found evidence of a natural nuclear reactor that had spontaneously ignited and run for hundreds of thousands of years, 2 billion years ago. The Oklo reactor proved a critical point: the isotopic signatures of nuclear fission. The specific waste products like xenon and neodymium are incredibly stable and can be preserved across billions of years of geological time. With this knowledge, other, more anomalous sites become deeply puzzling. In ancient rock formations, geologists have found concentrations of isotopes that are difficult to explain through natural processes. Some layers at mass extinction boundaries contain spikes of what appear to be the decay products of elements like plutonium, an almost entirely artificial substance. Are these just unexplained natural phenomena, or are they the faint, radioactive ghosts of a conflict or a catastrophe from a civilization that had unlocked the power of the atom millions of years before we did? Beyond the atom, there are the more mundane, but perhaps more telling, traces of industry. Our world is filled with technofossils. We have created hundreds of new minerals that do not exist in nature, in the slag from smelters, in the ash from coal-fired power plants, in the complex alloys of our electronics. We mine and concentrate rare earth elements, taking them from deep within the earth and scattering them across its surface in our discarded devices. Over millions of years, these concentrations could be buried and preserved, appearing to future geologists as a thin, bizarre layer of rock with a chemical composition that makes no natural sense. And indeed, when scientists look, they find these strange layers. In deep-sea sediment cores, they find microscopic spheres of titanium and other exotic metals, perfectly formed in layers that date back tens of millions of years. On land, geologists have identified thin strata containing unusual polymers and processed carbon molecules that resist easy explanation. These are not the obvious ruins of a factory. They are the factory smoke, its waste, its chemical signature, compressed into a single, silent line in the rock. The distribution of these particles is key. A local anomaly can be explained by a meteorite impact or a strange volcanic eruption. But when the same anomalous layer, with the same unnatural chemical signature, is found in sediments all across the globe, it suggests a planet-wide event. An event that involved the atmospheric dispersal of industrially processed materials. But perhaps the most profound technosignature would not be in what a civilization added to the planet, but in how it reshaped it. The most powerful fingerprints would be the planetary scars. We are already leaving them. Our agricultural practices have changed erosion patterns. Our dams have altered the course of rivers. And our greenhouse gas emissions are beginning to re-engineer the entire climate. An even more advanced civilization might have undertaken engineering projects on a scale that would be visible for eons. In the atmospheric record preserved in Antarctic ice, we see not just the carbon spikes of the Petme, but other, stranger anomalies. There are periods where greenhouse gases like methane rise and fall with a speed and regularity that defy natural climate cycles. There are hints in more ancient samples of atmospheric compositions that seem fundamentally unnatural oxygen levels that are too high to be supported by biology alone, or traces of complex synthetic gases that could only have been manufactured. These could be the signatures of a civilization engaged in atmospheric engineering, adjusting a planetary thermostat to stave off an ice age, or to optimize the climate for its needs. We can also look for scars in the ground. A massive open-pit mine, after 50 million years, would be long gone, filled in, eroded, and buried. But it might leave behind a strange geological formation, a massive, unnatural concentration of specific minerals, or a pattern of rock strata that has been disturbed in a way that tectonics cannot explain. With satellite gravity surveys and ground-penetrating radar, we are now capable of peering deep beneath the surface. And in some places, we see patterns vast, buried geometric or linear features that are not easily explained as natural formations. Are these the final, faded scars of ancient roads, canals, or mining operations? Finally, there is the grimmest technosignature of all, the signature of extinction. The Earth has experienced 5 great mass extinctions. Most have clear natural culprits, but some show strange and unsettling patterns. They exhibit an unnatural selectivity, wiping out certain families of species with surgical precision, while leaving others, which should have been equally vulnerable, completely untouched. This is not how a blind catastrophe like an asteroid impact or a volcanic winter normally works. A natural disaster is indiscriminate, but an engineered event, a bioweapon, or a deliberate act of planetary ecological cleansing could be highly selective. When a mass extinction is followed by the sudden, rapid appearance of a host of new, well-adapted species, it suggests the possibility that the slate was not just wiped clean, but was cleared to make way for a new, pre-planned ecosystem. The extinction event itself could be the technosignature of a civilization terraforming its own planet, with catastrophic consequences for the existing life. The search for fingerprints in the stone has just begun. It is a science in its infancy, but the clues that have been found so far, the chemical ghosts, the isotopic anomalies, the planetary scars all point to the same unsettling possibility that the silence of deep time is not empty. It is just speaking a language we are only now beginning to learn how to hear. If the story of a lost world has been written, it is not in a language of our own making. The relentless machinery of geology has ground its cities to dust and its artifacts to anonymous sediment. But what if the civilization itself, in its final moments, or perhaps throughout its long existence, understood this fragility? What if it chose to preserve its memory not in materials it knew would decay, but in forms that could endure, in the foundations of the cultures that followed, in the unyielding permanence of stone, and in the deep, resonant currents of human myth? The search for our predecessors now turns from the silent testimony of geology to the faint, and often contradictory, echoes of a drowned world. Whispers that have survived in our history, our monuments, and our oldest, most sacred stories. The investigation begins where our own recorded history is said to open, in the sun-scorched plains of Mesopotamia. Here, in the land of Sumer, civilization appears in the archaeological record not with the tentative first steps of an infant, but with the confident stride of a full-grown adult. When archaeologists in the early 20th century, men like Sir Leonard Woolley, first unearthed the ruins of cities like Ur and Uru, they expected to dig through layers of primitive development, the slow, gradual climb from mud huts to villages, from villages to towns, from towns to the first grand experiments in urban living. They found no such thing. In the deepest, boldest layers accessible, they found perfection. They found cities that seemed to have been planned from their inception, with streets laid out in precise grids and complex, engineered drainage systems. They found monumental ziggurats built with an architectural confidence that should have taken centuries of trial and error to develop. And then there was the knowledge. The very first cuneiform tablets were not crude, experimental pictographs. They were sophisticated instruments of a fully realized bureaucracy, recording complex legal contracts, grain inventories, and tax records with a grammatical and mathematical precision that would not be out of place in a modern office. The invention of writing, it seemed, had no infancy. It was born with a complete vocabulary and syntax. Their mathematics were, if anything, even more baffling. The Sumerians did not count on their fingers in a simple base-10 system. They employed a highly elegant base-60 system, a sexagesimal framework that allowed for the easy calculation of complex fractions and the precise division of time and space. It is a system so mathematically robust that we, in our own advanced age, still use it to measure every minute of our day and every degree of a circle. Its origins are a complete mystery. It does not seem to develop from any simpler system. It simply appears. It is as if their mathematics were designed by minds that already understood the complex astronomical and geometric calculations. They would one day be used for dot, and they used them. Their astronomy was nothing short of miraculous for its time. Sumerian observers tracked the movements of the planets with an accuracy that seems impossible without telescopes. They knew that Venus, which appears as both the morning and evening star, was a single object, a fact that would elude the Greeks for 1,000 years. They charted its complex 8-year cycle with mathematical precision. They predicted eclipses. They distinguished the faint, slow-moving light of Saturn from the fixed stars around it. Later, Babylonian copies of their star charts, like the Venus tablet of Ammas-Suduka, are so accurate that modern astronomers still use them to date ancient chronologies. And strangest of all, this incredible body of knowledge appears to have degraded over time. Later, cultures, like the Babylonians and Assyrians, seemed to be copying, with declining precision, the work of their Sumerian predecessors, as if they were the inheritors of a system they no longer fully understood. It is the curve of memory, not invention. How did the Sumerians explain their own impossible dawn? They did not claim to have invented these arts themselves. Their myths, the oldest stories ever written down, are explicit on this point. They tell of the Anunnaki, the Watchers, or those who from heaven to earth came. These beings were not gods in the modern sense of ethereal, omnipotent deities. They were described as tangible teachers, who descended and delivered to a primitive humanity the foundational tools of civilization. They brought me a series of divine decrees or cosmic principles, which were in fact discrete packages of knowledge, agriculture, law, writing, architecture, and astronomy. The Sumerian stories are not tales of creation, but tales of instruction. They do not describe a species slowly discovering its own potential. They describe a species being taught, a culture receiving an inheritance. The sudden, inexplicable rise of Sumer, then, might not be an origin story at all. It may be the first and clearest echo we have of a predecessor civilization, a memory of a reconstruction project, a desperate attempt by the survivors of a lost world to rebuild and preserve what they could. If Sumer is an echo in history, then the megalithic structures scattered across our planet are an echo in stone. Long before Sumer, long before the first word was written, someone was building with a skill and on a scale that defies our understanding of the ancient world. In the highlands of southeastern Turkey lies Göbekli Tepe, a site that has shattered every conventional timeline of human history. Discovered by Klaus Schmidt in the 1990s, this sprawling complex of massive, T-shaped limestone pillars was erected some 11,600 years ago. This is a date so ancient it precedes the invention of agriculture, pottery, metallurgy, and the first known cities by more than 6 millennia. The people who built it were supposed to have been simple, nomadic hunter-gatherers. But the work at Göbekli Tepe is anything but simple. Pillars weighing up to 20 tons were quarried, transported, and erected with a precision that would challenge modern engineers. They are covered in sophisticated, stylized relief carvings of animals, foxes, lions, scorpions, and vultures arranged not randomly, but in what appear to be complex symbolic or narrative scenes. Many of the enclosures are aligned with specific astronomical events. A Neolithic observatory built by a people who, according to our histories, should not have had the time, the resources, or the knowledge for such pursuits. But the most profound mystery of Göbekli Tepe is not how it was built, but how it ended. Around 8000 BCE, after centuries of use, the entire site was deliberately and painstakingly buried. Its creators covered their masterpiece with tons of earth and debris, preserving it in a man-made hill. This was not an act of abandonment or destruction. It was an act of intentional preservation, a time capsule created on a monumental scale. It is as if the builders knew their time was over, and they were sealing their knowledge away for a distant future, for a world that might one day be ready to understand it. Göbekli Tepe feels less like the world's first temple, and more like the world's first library, built by the survivors of a cataclysm, desperate to save what little knowledge they had left. And they were not alone. The echo in stone is a global phenomenon. In the high Andes of Bolivia, at an altitude of 13,000 feet, lie the ruins of Puma Punku. Here, massive blocks of diorite, a stone nearly as hard as diamond, are cut with machine-like precision. We see perfectly straight lines, right angles, and smooth, polished surfaces that seem impossible to achieve with the primitive tools of the time. H-shaped blocks are scattered across the landscape, engineered with such uniformity they appear to have been mass-produced. The conventional dating places the sites at around 500 AD, but like so many other megalithic sites, its astronomical alignments suggest an origin far, far older. This pattern of anomalous ancient engineering repeats across the world, a common architectural language spoken by cultures that supposedly never met. The colossal stone foundations at Baalbek in Lebanon, some weighing over 1,000 tons. The submerged, geometric structures off the coast of Yonaguni, Japan. These sites are not just large, they are intelligent. They are built with a mastery of mathematics and an understanding of the planet that feels out of time. They are encoded with sacred geometry, the golden ratio, and aligned with the slow 26,000-year cycle of precession, the wobble of the Earth's axis, a phenomenon that requires millennia of continuous, precise observation to detect. This is not the work of isolated, primitive cultures stumbling upon the same ideas by chance. It is the signature of a shared, global inheritance, a forgotten science of form and frequency, a fingerprint of a single, lost, apparent civilization. If the stones are the physical archive of this lost world, then mythology is its spiritual echo. It is the last, and perhaps most human, trace of what was lost. Nearly every culture on Earth, from the mountains of the Andes to the valleys of India, preserves a memory of a great flood. These are not simply stories of local inundations. They are tales of a global cataclysm, an event that wiped the world clean and reset civilization. And the structure of these stories is so hauntingly similar that it defies coincidence. In the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, a man named Utnapishtim is warned by the gods of a coming deluge. He is given precise instructions to build a great boat, to seal it with pitch, and to carry aboard the seeds of all living things. After the flood, his boat comes to rest on a mountain, and he sends out a dove, a swallow, and a raven to find dry land. This story, one of the oldest ever written, is a near-perfect mirror of the biblical tale of Noah, and they are not the only ones. The Hindu Puranas tell of Manu, who is warned by the god Vishnu in the form of a fish to build a great ship. The Greek myths tell of Deucalion, who survives a flood sent by Zeus in a wooden chest. The Hopi of North America speak of being sheltered underground while the world above was destroyed by water. This is not cultural diffusion. These are the fragmented memories of a real and terrifying event, a trauma etched into the collective psyche of our species, and science now provides a candidate for this event. Around 12,800 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, the Earth's climate plunged suddenly and violently back into a deep freeze. This period, known as the Younger Dryas, is now thought by many scientists to have been triggered by the impact of a fragmented comet. The evidence for this impact, a thin layer of nanodiamines, melted glass, and other extraterrestrial markers, has been found across multiple continents. Such an event would have been unimaginably catastrophic. It would have caused global wildfires, destabilized the great ice sheets that covered North America, and triggered meltwater floods on a scale our world has not seen since. It would have been a world-drowning event. This cataclysm may be the missing link that ties the echoes together. The builders of Göbekli Tepe lived at the very beginning of this period of chaos. Were they the survivors of a more advanced civilization that was destroyed in the initial impact, desperately building a monument to preserve their knowledge of the stars and the cycles of time? And the great civilization bearers of Mythio and Nes in Babylon, the Viracocha in Peru, the Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica, these strange, bearded figures who appeared after the flood to teach a shattered humanity the arts of civilization again. Were they the distorted memories of these same highly knowledgeable survivors, fanning out across a broken world to try and restart the great project of civilization? This is the story whispered by the echoes. A story of a great, advanced civilization, not of gods or aliens, but of humans like us, who reached a high level of understanding. A people who mapped the globe, who understood the cosmos, and who built monuments to the eternal cycles of time. A world that was destroyed in a global cataclysm, drowned by flood and fire, and a handful of survivors, the keepers of a fading memory, who left us the echoes of their drowned world, hoping that one day we would learn to hear them again. Of course, here is Chapter 4 of the documentary, which continues the investigation by exploring the traces a lost civilization might have left within our myths, our art, and our very biology. The trail of evidence has led us from the silent, compressed layers of the geological record to the enigmatic stones of a forgotten prehistory. We have found echoes of a lost world in the impossible dawn of Sumerian civilization and in the shared global memory of a great and terrible flood. The physical and historical clues point to a story that has been almost, but not entirely, erased. But what if the most enduring archive of this predecessor civilization is not made of stone or clay? What if, anticipating the destruction of their physical world, they chose a more resilient method of preservation? What if they encoded their most essential knowledge into the most durable vessel they knew? The living, breathing, and storytelling mind of humanity itself. The search now turns inward, away from the external world and into the library of myth, the gallery of ancient art, and the very blueprint of our own biology. We are looking for the ghost in our machine. If a highly advanced civilization were to face an unavoidable, world-ending cataclysm, its greatest priority would be the preservation of knowledge. Physical media books, tablets, data drives are fragile. They burn, they corrode, they decay. Even libraries carved in stone, like the great monuments we have seen, can have their meaning eroded by time. But there is one storage system that has proven its ability to transmit complex information across thousands of generations, even in the absence of literacy or technology. That system is story. Myth, ritual, and oral tradition are cultural black boxes, narrative technologies designed to encode, preserve, and transmit critical information in a format that is both memorable and resistant to change. Could the myths of our most ancient cultures be more than just fanciful tales of gods and monsters? Could they be the functioning remnants of a sophisticated knowledge preservation system? When we re-examine the mythology of ancient Sumer through this lens, the stories begin to look less like religion and more like technical documentation. The beings they called the Anunnaki are not portrayed as omnipotent, ethereal deities who demand worship. They are described as consultants, as project managers, as teachers. The creation myths are not grand, poetic tales of cosmic genesis. They are detailed, sequential accounts of planetary and biological engineering. The texts describe the god Enki traveling from city to city, not to punish or reward, but to organize. He assigns specific roles to each settlement: who will manage the irrigation systems, who will oversee brick production, who will maintain the astronomical observations. The language is that of a city planner, not a god. The texts are filled with this strange, operational specificity. The myths describing the construction of canals do not just decree that they should exist. They explain how they should be built, detailing the proper depth, the optimal spacing between water gates, and the seasonal timing for flood management. The stories of the goddess Ninmah, who was tasked with public health, contain passages that read like protocols for medical procedures and sanitation. Nabu, the god of scribes, is associated with texts that lay out precise frameworks for contract law and data management. This is not mythology as we know it. This is a civilizational operating system, encoded in narrative form and attributed to divine sources to ensure its sacred, and therefore unaltered, transmission through time. The mythological framework was a deliberate preservation strategy. By transforming technical knowledge into divine instruction, the creators of this system built a cultural immune system that would protect essential information from the degradation that affects all secular knowledge. And this pattern is not unique to Sumer. It is the defining characteristic of the global civilization bearer archetype. Across the world, in cultures separated by oceans and millennia, we find the same story: a strange, wise being who arrives after a great cataclysm, gathers the traumatized, scattered survivors, and reteaches them the arts of civilization. In the Andes, he is called Viracocha, a bearded figure who brought light and knowledge to a world of darkness. In Mesopotamia, he was Oannes, a fish-like being who emerged from the sea to give humanity writing, law, and architecture. In Mesoamerica, he was Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent who descended from the sky. These figures were not gods who created the world, but teachers who rebooted it. They could be the distorted, deified memories of the real, human survivors of the drowned world, the highly knowledgeable remnants of a predecessor civilization, who saw it as their duty to reseed their lost knowledge among the primitive tribes that survived the catastrophe. Their advanced understanding of agriculture, engineering, and astronomy would have seemed like magic to a traumatized, pre-literate people. And so, over generations, the memory of these human teachers would decay into the myth of the gods. If myth was the software for this preservation system, then ancient art was its visual interface. Long before writing, humanity was communicating in a language of symbols. And in the oldest galleries of our world, the deep caves and forgotten rock shelters, we find depictions that challenge our assumptions about the primitive mind. In the Sahara, on the Tassili Naja Plateau, are thousands of petroglyphs, some dating back over 12,000 years. They depict a world that was then a lush savanna, full of elephants, giraffes, and hunters. But they also depict something else. Strange, humanoid figures with large, round heads, often featureless faces, and what appear to be helmets or antennas. They are known as the Roundheads. They seem to float, to descend, to interact with the smaller, more recognizably human figures around them. Anthropologists interpret them as shamans in ritual masks, or symbolic representations of spirits. But their eerie resemblance to modern depictions of extraterrestrial visitors has led others to ask if they are not symbols, but recollections. This is not an isolated phenomenon. In the Jomon period of ancient Japan, artisans created the dogu figurines, strange, stylized humanoid figures dating back as far as 10,000 BCE. They are covered in intricate patterns, but their most striking feature is their faces, huge, goggle-like eyes, and forms that are hauntingly similar to a person in a pressurized suit or helmet. The official explanation is that they are fertility idols or shamanic figures. But why would a fertility idol need goggles? In the Kimberley region of Australia, Aboriginal cave paintings depict the Wandjina, the cloud beings. They are shown with large, dark eyes, no mouths, and a halo-like ring around their heads. The myths say they came from the sky in the dreamtime, created the world, and then withdrew, promising to return. Across the world, our oldest art seems to be telling us a similar story, that in our deepest past, we were in the presence of beings who were not quite like us, beings that were often associated with the sky. Are these just the products of a universal human imagination, or are they the fragmented, visual memories of a real encounter, the portraits of the same civilization bearers remembered in myth? Even the abstract symbols that litter these ancient sites speak in a forgotten language. The spiral, the double helix, the serpent, the swastika, these are not random decorations. They are fundamental concepts, ideograms, representing the cosmos, the unfolding of time, the structure of life itself. They are found everywhere, from the megalithic temples of Malta to the petroglyphs of the American Southwest. It is a shared visual language from a time before words, another echo of a single, global parent culture. A people who thought not in sentences, but in symbols, in frequencies. In the fundamental geometry of creation, the final and most intimate echo may be the one that lies within our own biology, in the very structure of our minds and our DNA. the great leap forward, that sudden, inexplicable explosion of human creativity, language, and symbolic thought that occurred some 50,000 years ago, remains one of the greatest puzzles in evolutionary biology. For hundreds of thousands of years, our hominid ancestors had been slowly progressing, their toolkits changing little over vast stretches of time. And then, in a geological instant, everything changed. Art, complex tools, burial rituals, and sophisticated language all appeared. We became, for the first time, behaviorally modern. What triggered this cognitive Big Bang? The source material we have examined offers a radical and speculative possibility. One rooted in the same myths that speak of our own creation. The Sumerian tablets say the Anunnaki mixed their essence with early humans. Genesis speaks of the sons of God interbreeding with the daughters of men. The myths consistently portray humanity not as a slow, natural evolution, but as an engineered or upgraded species. Could there be a biological truth to these stories? Modern genetics has revealed its own anomalies. The human genome contains genes that appear to have no evolutionary precursors in our primate lineage. Genes that seem to have been acquired through horizontal gene transfer from much simpler organisms like bacteria process that is common in the microbial world, but almost unheard of in complex animals. While this is still a developing field of research, it represents a crack in the neat, linear story of our evolution, a hint that our own biological history may be stranger than we have imagined. Perhaps the ghost in our machine is not just a cultural memory, but a biological one, and perhaps the key to awakening it lies not in our genes, but in our consciousness. Ancient traditions from around the world speak of the pineal gland, a tiny, pinnacon-shaped organ in the center of the brain, as the third eye, the seat of the soul, a gateway to higher perception. For centuries, modern science dismissed it as a vestigial feature, but we now know it is highly active, producing hormones like melatonin, and that it is uniquely sensitive to light and electromagnetic fields. It is also one of the places where the molecule DMT, dimethyltryptamine, is thought to be produced in the human body. DMT, often called the spirit molecule, is a powerful psychedelic that triggers intense, often mystical, visionary experiences. It is a key that seems to unlock hidden doors of perception. Why would our bodies evolve an organ and a molecule that seem designed to open gateways to other realms of experience? The sources suggest a forgotten science, one that was not focused on external technology, but on the internal technology of consciousness itself. It is possible that a predecessor civilization's greatest mastery was not over stone or metal, but over the mind. They may have understood that consciousness is not just a byproduct of the brain, but a fundamental aspect of reality, a field that can be tuned and explored. This idea connects the echo in our biology back to the echo in stone. We have seen that many ancient megalithic sites appear to be acoustic devices. The Hypogeum in Malta, Newgrange in Ireland, these are chambers that resonate at specific low frequencies around 110 Hz. Modern neuroscience has shown that these same frequencies can shift human brain activity into theta states. The brainwaves associated with deep meditation, dreaming, and heightened intuition. The ancient temples may not have been places of worship. They may have been tuning forks, sophisticated instruments designed to interact with the human body, to stimulate the pineal gland, and to awaken the dormant, visionary potential within our own minds. They were designed to help us remember. The ghost in our machine is not a passive memory. It is a potential, a seed of a different kind of awareness, a different way of being, that was planted long ago. The myths, the art, the stones, and the very structure of our consciousness may all be parts of a single, elegant, and unimaginably ancient technology of awakening, left behind by a civilization that understood that the most important truths are not learned, but remembered, of course. Here is the next chapter of the documentary, which synthesizes the evidence into a speculative portrait of the lost. Civilizations, science, and worldview. We have followed the echoes of a world that should not have existed, a story that refuses to be forgotten. We have seen its fingerprints in the sudden, impossible dawn of Sumerian civilization. We have touched its memory in the impossibly ancient and sophisticated stones of Göbekli Tepe and Puma Punku. We have heard its voice in the shared, global myth of a world-drowning flood, and in the strange, anomalous figures that haunt our most ancient art, and we have felt its presence in the very wiring of our own consciousness, in the dormant potentials and evolutionary puzzles that hint at a history far stranger than we have been told. These disparate threads, pulled from geology, from history, from myth, and from biology, begin to weave a single, coherent tapestry. The image that emerges is not just of a lost civilization, but of a lost paradigm, a lost science, fundamentally different way of understanding and interacting with the universe. A science whose final traces suggest that its ultimate mastery was not over matter, but over mind, and that its origins were written not on Earth, but in the stars. Our own scientific revolution was born from a paradigm of force and matter. We learned to see the universe as a grand machine, a clockwork of predictable laws that could be understood by taking it apart, by isolating its components, by measuring and quantifying its physical properties. Our technology is a testament to this view. We burn, we break, we extract, we dominate. We build engines by harnessing explosive force. We create power by splitting the atom. Our science shouts, but the echoes of our predecessors suggest that their science listened. It was a paradigm not of force, but of frequency. A science not of separation, but of resonance. This lost science appears to be rooted in the understanding that all matter, at its most fundamental level, is vibration. The ancients may not have had the language of quantum physics, but they seem to have possessed a deep, intuitive, and practical mastery of its consequences. We see this in their architecture. The megalithic chambers at Newgrange in Ireland, the hypogeum of Calsafleen in Malta, the subterranean temples of Peruthes are not just shelters or tombs. They are acoustic instruments. If the earth was their foundation, then the cosmos was their blueprint. The second great principle of this lost science is a profound and literal connection to the stars. A celestial correspondence summed up in the ancient Hermetic maxim, as above, so below. The astronomical alignments of these ancient sites are too numerous, too precise, and too consistent to be accidental. They represent a global, multi-millennial project of mirroring the heavens on Earth. We see it in the three great pyramids of Giza, which form a perfect terrestrial map of the three stars in Orion's belt. We see it in the sprawling temple complex of Angkor Wat in Cambodia, whose layout mirrors the constellation of Draco, not as it appears now, but as it appeared in the sky in 10,500 BCE. We see it in the Great Sphinx, which at the vernal equinox, in that same distant epoch, would have gazed directly at its own celestial counterpart. The constellation of Leo. By this obsession, why this need to build a cosmic mirror? It was not just for calendars or agriculture. The knowledge they were encoding was far deeper. They were tracking the precession of the equinoxes, the slow, 26,000-year wobble of the Earth's axis. This great year was, to them, the master cycle of time, a clock that governed not just the changing position of the stars, but the rise and fall of civilizations, the great ages of the world. The Vedic texts call these ages the yugas, a cycle that moves from a golden age of enlightenment down to our own Kali Yuga, the age of darkness and forgetting. The builders of these great monuments were not just astronomers. They were chronographers, masters of time who understood that civilizations, like stars, have a life cycle. Their great works were clocks, designed to endure the long night of a cosmic winter, to carry a message across the ages of forgetting, and to mark a future time of reawakening. But the connection to the stars may have been even more intimate than this. It may have been biological. Across the world, the myths are unanimous. Our creators, our teachers, our ancestors came from the stars. And not just from the sky, but from specific star systems that are referenced again and again: the Pleiades, Sirius, and the same constellation of Orion that is mirrored on the ground at Giza, the Dogon of Moli. An oral culture knew of the existence of Sirius B, the invisible companion star to Sirius, a tiny, super-dense white dwarf whose existence was only confirmed by modern telescopes in the 19th century. They knew its 50-year orbital period and described its immense density. They claimed this knowledge was given to them by the nano-amphibious beings who came from the Sirius system long ago. Are these just myths? Or are they a preserved memory of our own origins? The idea of star ancestors leads us to the most speculative, and perhaps most profound, aspect of this lost paradigm. What if human consciousness itself is not entirely of this earth? What if, as the myths insist, we are a hybrid species, a blend of a terrestrial, evolved primate and something else, a star-woven soul? This would not necessarily be a physical, biological inheritance, but an informational one, an echo in our consciousness, a dormant seed of awareness. It would explain the great leap forward, that sudden, inexplicable flowering of the human mind. It would explain the persistent, cross-cultural pull we feel toward the stars, a sense not of curiosity, but of homesickness. And it would explain the purpose of the lost science itself, the technology of resonance, the temples tuned to the earth and the stars. The internal science of consciousness soul of it may have been designed for a single purpose: to reawaken this dormant, stellar part of ourselves. If this was their science, this grand, unified paradigm of consciousness, resonance, and cosmology, then its disappearance from the world is a tragedy far greater than the loss of a few cities. So why was it lost? A science so subtle, so reliant on internal states of being and unbroken cultural transmission, would be incredibly fragile. It could not be reverse-engineered from a broken fragment. It could not be rebooted from an instruction manual. It required a living tradition, a continuous chain of awakened individuals passing the knowledge to the next generation. That chain was catastrophically broken. The Younger Dryas impact, the floods, the fires, the sudden descent into a fight for survival. Such a cataclysm would not just destroy a civilization. It would shatter its state of consciousness. The trauma would have forced a paradigm shift in the survivors, a move away from the subtle science of harmony and toward a more brutal, physical science of domination and survival. The focus would have shifted from listening to the universe to shouting at it. The survivors, those who carried the last embers of this ancient knowledge, would have understood this. They would have known that the world was no longer ready for their science. They would have seen that their knowledge, in the hands of a traumatized and fragmented humanity, might even be dangerous. And so, they hid it. They encoded its most fundamental principles in the safest, most durable forms they could devise. They hid the celestial cycles in the alignment of stones. They hid the principles of resonance in the proportions of temples. And they hid the story of their origins in the sacred, unalterable narratives of myth. They deliberately buried their world, as the builders of Gogli Tepe buried their temple, creating a time capsule of wisdom disguised as primitive superstition. This is the great forgetting. We did not simply lose a civilization. We lost an entire way of perceiving and existing in the universe. We inherited the hardware, the megalithic sites, the myths, the dormant potential in our own DNA, but we lost the software, the conscious state required to operate it. We became a species with amnesia, living in the ruins of a forgotten golden age, mistaking the libraries of our ancestors for the tombs of primitive kings. We developed our own science, a powerful and brilliant science of the material world. But it is a science of the part, not the whole. It is a science that can dissect a body, but cannot find the soul. The lost paradigm was a science of the whole, a science that understood that the soul was not in the body, but that the body was in the soul, and that the soul was woven from the light of the stars. The profound loss is not that we have forgotten them. It is that, in forgetting them, we have forgotten a fundamental part of ourselves. Of course, here is the next chapter of the documentary, which explores the path to rediscovering the lost science of our predecessors. We stand now in the quiet afterglow of a staggering revelation. The echoes from our planet's deep past have resolved into a coherent, if ghostly, image, a portrait of a civilization built not on force, but on frequency. A science based not on the mastery of the external world, but on the attunement of the inner one. We have unearthed the story of a lost paradigm, a path of harmony with the earth and the cosmos that was abandoned in the traumatic aftermath of a world-breaking cataclysm. This knowledge is a profound and unsettling inheritance. It presents us with a mirror to our own civilization, showing us a path not taken, a potential we have forgotten we possess. But to what end? Is this story merely a tragic epitaph for a world long dead? Or is it something more? Is it a roadmap, a fragmented instruction manual, left behind for us to find, a guide to our own reawakening? The journey now shifts from archaeology to application, from uncovering the past to rebuilding it. The great work is no longer one of excavation, but of remembrance. If the echoes of this lost world are a library of whispers, then our first task is to learn how to read them. This requires the birth of a new, interdisciplinary science, one that breaks down the walls between our modern fields of knowledge. It is a science that must be as comfortable with the resonant frequencies of a megalithic chamber as it is with the complex syntax of a mythological text, as fluent in the language of quantum physics as it is in the neurochemistry of the human brain. It is the science of decoding the inheritance. The first step is to return to the great stone archives themselves, to Gogekli Tepe, to Puma, Punku, to the thousands of other anomalous sites scattered across the globe, but with new eyes and new tools. The first age of archaeology sought to measure and date these sites. The new age must seek to listen to them. Scientists would arrive not just with trowels and brushes, but with advanced acoustic sensors, magnetometers, and ground-penetrating radar. The goal is no longer simply to map the structures, but to map their energetic properties. In the silent chambers of the Hypogeum, or the Great Pyramid, They would conduct a form of sonic archaeology by generating sound at every conceivable frequency. They would listen for the structure's resonant peaks, for the specific notes that the chamber was designed to sing. They would map the standing waves, the acoustic sweet spots, the places where the vibrational energy is focused. These sites would be treated not as dead stone, but as dormant machines, their purpose encoded in the very geometry of their construction. The angles of the walls, the proportions of the chambers, the specific type of stone used. Every architectural choice would be re-examined, not for its aesthetic or structural purpose, but for its effect on sound, on light, on the local electromagnetic field. The stones themselves would be seen as a form of solid-state information storage, their crystalline structures a potential repository of data, a hard drive from a forgotten age. Simultaneously, a second great project would begin, an attempt to decode the library of myth. Using advanced artificial intelligence, linguists and mythologists would feed the entire corpus of world mythology into a single, unified network. The AI would not be looking for surface-level stories of gods and heroes. It would be hunting for the deep, recurring structures, the mathematical patterns, the astronomical data, and the procedural instructions that lie hidden beneath the allegorical surface. The myths would be treated as a user's manual for the human mind, a guide to the lost science of consciousness, written in a language of symbol and metaphor. The AI would cross-reference the story of Oannes, emerging from the sea with the precise timing of post-Ice Age sea level rise. It would analyze the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl celestial journey as a potential star map. It would decode the sacred geometries described in the Vedic texts and compare them to the proportions of ancient temples. The stories of gods creating humans would be analyzed for their potential connection to biological principles. The myths would cease to be viewed as the fanciful inventions of a primitive people and would be treated as the highly sophisticated, time-tested data compression technology that they are. Every epic, every ritual, every piece of folklore becomes a potential clue, a fragment of a single, coherent system of knowledge, shattered into 1,000 pieces and scattered across the cultures of the world. If the stones are the tuning forks and the myths are the instruction manual, then the ultimate subject of this new science is the human being itself. The lost science of our predecessors was not an external one. It was a science of the soul. Its laboratory was the human body. Its technology was the awakened human mind. And so, the path of remembrance must ultimately be an inward journey, a process of retuning the instrument. Here the most radical speculations of our investigation meet the cutting edge of modern science. The fields of neuroscience and consciousness research, long considered a soft science, would become the central pillar of this great project. The first step is to understand the instrument itself. Neuroscientists would begin an exhaustive study of the brain's response to the very forces the ancients seemed to master: frequency and resonance. We already know that the brain is not a static computer. It is a resonant electrical system. Its activity occurs in waves, beta, alpha, theta, delta, each corresponding to a different state of consciousness. We know that external frequencies, such as binaural beats or the low-frequency hum found in ancient temples, can entrain these brain waves, shifting a person's state from alert and anxious to meditative and open. This new science would map these effects with unprecedented precision, creating a detailed atlas of how specific sound frequencies can be used to unlock specific states of mind. The investigation would then turn to the most enigmatic structure in the human brain, the pineal gland. Long revered by esoteric traditions as the third eye, this tiny crystalline organ is now understood to be a key player in our neurochemistry. It is uniquely sensitive to light and, some research suggests, to electromagnetic fields. It is our biological connection to the great cycles of the planet. This new science would explore the radical hypothesis that the pineal gland is a dormant biological radio, a receiver capable of picking up information not from the five senses, but from a deeper field of reality. The research into endogenous DMT, the powerful psychedelic molecule that floods the brain during birth, death, and visionary experiences, would intensify. The goal would be to understand if this spirit molecule is a key, a chemical trigger designed to activate the pineal gland's latent, perceptual abilities. This research would culminate in a series of groundbreaking and deeply controversial experiments. In shielded laboratories, scientists would construct perfect replicas of the resonant chambers found at sites like the hypogeum. They would recreate the precise acoustic properties, the exact frequencies that have echoed in those stones for thousands of years. Human subjects, trained in meditative practices derived from the decoded myths, would be placed within these chambers. Their brain activity would be monitored by the most advanced neuroimaging technology, tracking the flow of information through their neural pathways in real time. They would be guided into deep theta states, and then, using a combination of sound, light, and perhaps even carefully administered neurochemicals, the scientists would attempt to deliberately and safely activate the pineal gland. They would be attempting to replicate the conditions of the ancient mystery schools, to systematically recreate the conscious state of the megalithic builders. They would be trying to retune the human instrument to the frequency of the cosmos. For a long time, the results are subtle. The subjects report profound meditative states, a sense of unity with their surroundings, a feeling of peace. But then, a breakthrough occurs. In one of the acoustically tuned chambers, a subject, a mathematician, reports not a feeling, but an image, a vision. But it is not a dreamlike, symbolic vision. It is a vision of pure, complex geometry, a rotating, multidimensional object of impossible beauty and mathematical perfection. She is able to describe it, to draw it. When her drawings are analyzed, they are found to represent the solution to a problem in theoretical physics that has remained unsolved for a century. The information did not come from her memory. It was not a product of her own creativity. It felt, she reported, like she was remembering it. The experiment is repeated with other subjects, from other disciplines. The patterns become undeniable. When the specific resonant frequencies are applied in the right context, the subjects begin to access information. A biologist has a vision of a DNA sequence for an organism that does not exist on Earth. A musician hears a complex, layered symphony that seems to hold mathematical proofs within its structure. A historian describes, with uncanny accuracy, the social structure of a city that has not yet been excavated. The information is structured, complex, and often verifiable. The subjects are not hallucinating. They are accessing a signal. This leads to a staggering new hypothesis. The information is not coming from the stones, or even from a dormant part of the brain. The brain, when properly tuned, is acting as a terminal. It is accessing a universal information field, what some esoteric traditions have called the Akashic record. Here, this concept is stripped of its mystical baggage and treated as a scientific possibility. Perhaps information is a fundamental property of the universe, encoded not on hard drives, but in the quantum vacuum, in the very structure of space-time itself. And perhaps consciousness is the mechanism by which this information becomes aware of itself. The lost civilization, in this view, had not just mastered consciousness. They had mastered the art of accessing this universal library. Their temples were the terminals. Their rituals were the login protocols. Their myths were the user's guide. The first piece of clear, irrefutable proof comes from an astrophysicist participating in the experiment. In a deep, resonant state, she describes a star system in the Andromeda galaxy. She details the number of planets, their orbits, their atmospheric compositions, and the precise surface features of the third planet, describing continents and oceans in a world 2.5 million light-years away. Her description is logged as a fascinating, but unverifiable, visionary experience. But a year later, the James Webb Space Telescope, conducting a survey of nearby galaxies, takes the first direct image of that very star system. When the data is processed, the scientists are stunned. The exoplanet's atmospheric composition and surface features are a perfect match for the subject's vision. She had seen a world she could not have known existed. She had not imagined it. She had remembered it from the library of the universe. The path of remembrance has been found. Humanity has discovered the key to unlocking its lost inheritance. A new science that could solve our greatest problems, from energy and disease to our own destructive behaviors. It is a science that promises to connect us not just to our own past, but to the entire cosmos. But this power is unlike any we have ever wielded. It does not come from a machine we can control, but from a state of being we must cultivate. It is a power that comes from within. The discovery brings with it a terrifying responsibility. The knowledge in the universal library is not just of science and mathematics, but of everything. Every thought, every event, every possibility. To open this book is to be confronted with the infinite. The question is no longer if we can remember our lost past. The question is, are we truly ready for the knowledge we will find? Of course. Here is the next chapter of the documentary, which explores the consequences of rediscovering the lost science. The journey into the past has reached its destination. Humanity, after millennia of amnesia, has found the key to its lost inheritance. The breakthrough was not a singular event, but the opening of a door that leads not to a place, but to a state of being. In the quiet, resonant hum of the reconstructed chambers, the human mind, the instrument that had been left dormant for over 12,000 years, was the first verified glimpse of non-local information. The vision of a world in another galaxy was the proof. The path of remembrance was real. The universal library, the akashic field of 1 billion years of cosmic history, was open. The golden age was a fleeting dream, a brief, incandescent summer before the inevitable winter. Humanity, having been gifted the keys to the universe, found that the library of the cosmos contained not only the blueprints for paradise, but also the schematics for self-destruction. The revelation of the predecessor's fall was not a history lesson. It was a prophecy. And now, the prophecy was coming to pass. The world, once unified in its awe and its rapid ascent, was now fractured, split by the oldest and most fundamental division of all, the conflict between power and wisdom, between being and doing, between the path of the soul and the path of the sword. The children of silence, the purists, retreated into their resonant sanctuaries, seeking to sever their connection to a physical world they now saw as a corrupting influence. They preached of a final, collective transcendence. an escape from the tragic cycle of biology into the serene, timeless ocean of the universal mind. In their view, the body was a cage, and the great gift of the predecessors was the key to unlocking the door. Opposing them were the inheritors, the expansionists, who saw in the purists' philosophy a doctrine of cosmic cowardice. They believed that the universal field was humanity's birthright, the ultimate tool for achieving material godhood. They sought not to escape the physical world, but to perfect it, and then to master it. They began to explore the forbidden knowledge, the dark side of the resonant science, learning that the same frequencies that could heal a mind could also be used to shatter it. Consciousness, they discovered, was the ultimate weapon, and they were building an arsenal. A new Cold War had descended upon the planet, a silent, invisible conflict fought not with bombs and bullets, but with the very frequencies of thought itself. The stakes were no longer nations or ideologies, but the future of the human soul. The stalemate was broken on a day that would be remembered as the Day of Dissonance. From a hidden laboratory, an expansionist faction unleashed the first weapon of this new age. Their target was a large, purist enclave, a mountain sanctuary where thousands were joined in deep, resonant meditation. There was no explosion, no sound. There was only a silent, perfectly tuned broadcast of chaotic frequency, a weaponized signal designed to tear at the very fabric of the mind. For those within the sanctuary, the effect was instantaneous and absolute. Their shared harmonious consciousness was shattered into a billion shards of terror and confusion. It was not death, but a fate far worse, a shattering of the soul, a mass psychological annihilation that left thousands as empty, broken shells. The first shot had been fired, and it was an atrocity so profound it threatened to plunge the world into a war that no one could survive. As the psychic shockwave of the attack rippled across the globe, the planet itself began to respond. The great global grid of resonant chambers, the very network that had powered their golden age, began to destabilize. The Earth, which had been brought into a state of delicate harmony by the re-implementation of the lost science, was now falling out of tune. Strange, violent weather patterns, unlike any seen before, began to emerge. Seismic activity increased dramatically, with earthquakes striking in geologically stable regions. It was as if the planet's own nervous system was spasming in response to the dissonance of its dominant species. The navigators, in their deep trances, could feel it. The Earth was in pain. They were witnessing, in real time, the prelude to the same catastrophe that had destroyed their ancestors. The misuse of the great science was not just a threat to humanity. It was a threat to the world. The conflict was not just a war. It was a planetary disease. It was in this moment of ultimate crisis, with the world teetering on the brink of a second, self-inflicted fall, that a final, hidden layer of the universal library was revealed. In their deepest, most desperate communion with the universal field. The navigators were searching not for new technologies or new histories, but for a solution, for a sign of hope. And they found it. Buried beneath the tragic history of the predecessor's fall was a final message, a contingency plan left behind by a small, neutral faction of their civilization. A group of philosopher-scientists who had foreseen the inevitable schism and had spent their final days creating a last, desperate gambit to prevent it from ever happening again. The plan was terrifying in its scope, its risk, and its profound faith in the fundamental nature of consciousness. They called it the Great Weaving. The Weaver's Gambit was not a weapon to defeat one side, nor a shield to protect against attack. It was a technology designed to make the conflict itself impossible. It was a technology of forced, radical empathy. The blueprints that unfolded in the minds of the navigators were for a global, conscious interface. A network designed to do one thing: to temporarily dissolve the barriers between every individual human mind on the planet, and to merge them all, for a few brief, critical moments, into a single, shared, experiential state. It was a plan to force a species at war with itself to look in the mirror. The architecture of the gambit was in two parts. The first was the hardware, the existing global network of resonance chambers. The instruments of their golden age would need to be repurposed. They would be transformed from passive listening devices into an active, synchronized broadcast network. But this was not enough. The predecessors' plans called for the construction of two new colossal structures at the planet's primary energetic nodes, the magnetic north and south poles. These would be the great broadcast antennas, the primary regulators of the global network, designed to generate a planetary-scale resonant field of unimaginable stability and power. The plans were precise, detailing an architecture of exotic, crystalline materials and sacred geometry that would take the coordinated effort of the entire planet to construct. The second component was the software. This was the most critical and dangerous part of the plan. The predecessors had left behind a song, a complex, multi-layered sequence of resonant frequencies and acoustic harmonics. This was not music in our sense. It was a form of mathematical and vibrational programming, a mantra that, when broadcast through the global network, was designed to safely entrain the brainwaves of every human on Earth, guiding them into a deep theta state and temporarily deactivating the neural pathways that create the illusion of a separate individual self. It was the key to unlocking the collective mind. The risk was almost too great to contemplate. The navigators understood it immediately. If the resonant frequency was even slightly off, if the network was unstable, if the song was broadcast for too long, the consequences would be catastrophic. It could lead to mass insanity, the permanent loss of all individuality, a world of billions of empty shells. At worst, it could cause a complete collapse of the human nervous system, a mass extinction event brought about not by a weapon, but by a song. It was an all-or-nothing bet on the resilience of the human soul. The plan was revealed to a fractured and terrified world. The reaction was explosive. The expansionists saw it as the ultimate weapon, a mind-controlled device that could be used to enforce a single, unified will upon the entire species. They immediately tried to seize control of the project. The purists saw it as the ultimate violation, an artificial and forced merging of consciousness, a technological abomination that bypassed the sacred, individual journey of the soul. They advocated for its immediate destruction. The world was on a knife's edge, with the very technology designed to save them now becoming the catalyst for their final war. But a third faction emerged, a quiet coalition of scientists, engineers, and navigators who saw the gambit for what it truly was, not a weapon, not a spiritual sacrament, but the only hope. They understood that the alternative was the guaranteed, repeating cycle of self-destruction. They made the choice to proceed, to build the network, to stake the future of their species on a single, desperate act of faith. A great, silent, and frantic race against time began. As the planet's climate and geology grew more unstable, as the first skirmishes of the consciousness war began to erupt, a global effort of unprecedented scale got underway. In the frozen, desolate landscapes of the Arctic and Antarctic, the two great crystalline towers were raised, their construction guided by the memories of a science that was now humanity's last hope. The existing resonance chambers across the world were modified, their systems linked, their energies synchronized. The day of the great weaving arrived. As the network powered up, a deep, subaudible hum began to emanate from the Earth itself. A planetary note that had not been heard for 12,000 years. The expansionists prepared their psychic weapons to hijack the signal. The purists retreated into their deepest meditative shields to resist it, and the rest of the world held its breath. Then, from the two poles, the song began. It was not a sound that was heard with the ears, but with the soul. A wave of pure, resonant information swept across the globe at the speed of light. It was a feeling of profound peace, of a deep and unconditional belonging. For a single eternal moment, every human on Earth was connected. The soldier, his finger on the trigger of a dissonance weapon, suddenly felt the life, the history, the fear, and the love of the person he was about to attack. He did not just understand his enemy, he was his enemy. He felt the shared terror, the shared hope, the shared humanity. The purist, in his deep, isolated meditation, seeking to dissolve his own ego, was suddenly flooded with the passionate, striving, and beautifully imperfect ambitions of the expansionist. He did not just pity his rival's materialism. He felt the burning desire for creation, for growth, for the glorious expansion of life into the universe. The city dweller felt the slow, deep consciousness of the forest. The farmer felt the collective hum of the city. For 3 minutes, the illusion of the separate self was dissolved. Every human on the planet experienced the unfiltered, simultaneous consciousness of all 8 billion other humans. They felt the boundless joy of every birth, the crushing grief of every death, the quiet courage of every struggle, the burning shame of every cruelty. They felt the totality of their species, the magnificent, terrifying, and contradictory symphony of the human soul. But the experience went deeper. The resonant frequency of the weaving unlocked a second, more ancient layer. The network did not just connect humanity to itself. It connected humanity to the memory stored within the planet, to the universal field. For a few moments, every person on Earth was a navigator, and they all felt, with a clarity that was absolute and undeniable, the final moments of their predecessors. They felt the hubris, the fear, the rage of the First War. They felt the unimaginable, grief and regret of the architects of the First Fall as they witnessed the destruction of their world. They shared the memory of their own forgotten suicide. Then, as planned, the network powered down. The song faded. The hum of the earth returned to its normal, subtle frequency, and a great, profound, and global silence descended. It was a silence not of fear, but of awe. The conflict was over. It had not been won. It had been rendered meaningless. The very concept of sides, of us versus them, had been burned away in the incandescent, shared experience of the whole. There was no argument to be made, no treaty to be signed. Humanity had been shown the truth of itself, and that truth was unbreakable. They were one in the years that followed. A new consensus was born, a new human civilization that was neither purist nor expansionist. It was a synthesis. They chose to remain individual, biological beings. They had felt the ocean of collective consciousness, and they had understood its peace, but they had also, in feeling the totality of everyone, come to cherish the unique, precious, and irreplaceable gift of their own individual perspective. They embraced their mortality, their struggles, their beautiful, imperfect, and fleeting lives. But they did not abandon the great gift of the predecessors. They integrated the lost science, not as a tool for power or an escape from reality, but as a tool for wisdom and stewardship. The final scenes of the documentary are of this new world. We see humanity using the science of resonance to heal the planet's ecosystems, to restore the harmony that was broken. We see them using the universal field not to find all the answers, but to ask better questions, to guide their exploration of the outer and inner cosmos with a new, profound humility. We see a people who have finally learned to balance the science of doing with the science of being. They have not transcended their humanity. They have finally and fully inhabited it. The story of our predecessors was never just a history. It was a lesson and a warning, but it was also a gift. It was a path left for us to find that led not to an answer, but to a choice. The ultimate purpose of the great cosmic inheritance was not to give us the power of gods. It was to force us to confront the nature of our own humanity. The great weaving was the final exam, a test of a species' capacity for empathy. And it was a test that we, unlike those who came before, finally passed. The cycle is broken. The echoes of a drowned world have been answered, not with a shout, but with a song of our own. And now, the future is not a memory waiting to be repeated. It is a new story waiting to be written. And for the first time, we are the authors. Of course. Here is the final concluding chapter of the documentary. The silence that followed the great weaving was not an emptiness. It was a presence. It was the collective breath of a species that had, for the first time in its long and troubled history, truly seen itself. The illusions that had fueled 1,000 wars and 1,000,000 vanities, the illusions of separation, of nation, of tribe, of the individual self had been burned away in the clarifying, 3-minute fire of a shared, global consciousness. Humanity had been to the mountaintop. It had looked into the eyes of its 8 billion siblings, felt their joys and their sorrows, and in doing so, it had finally come home. The conflict between the purists and the inheritors did not end in a treaty or a surrender. It simply dissolved, its premises rendered absurd by an experience of unity that was no longer a philosophical concept, but a lived biological memory. But the weaving did more than end a war. It ended an age. It ended the Kali Yuga, the long, dark winter of our species forgetting. The catastrophic memory of our predecessors' fall, which had been experienced directly by every mind on the planet, was not a curse, but a final, terrible gift. It was a vaccination against our own hubris. We had not just learned of their failure, we had felt it. We had felt the grief of the architects of the first apocalypse, the architects of the younger Dryas, and in feeling it, we were freed from the need to repeat it. The cycle was broken. What emerges in the wake of this global awakening is a new form of civilization, a synthesis of the two paths that had almost torn it apart. It is a civilization that has learned the profound lesson of balance. The great project of the inheritors, the quest for knowledge, for progress, for the expansion of life into the cosmos is not abandoned, but it is transformed. The universal library, the Akashic field, is now approached not with the frantic hunger of a species desperate to conquer, but with the quiet reverence of a student in a sacred library. The flood of knowledge is not shut off, but it is metered, integrated, and guided by a new and singular principle: wisdom. Humanity, now unified, turns the lost science of resonance not toward the creation of weapons or the pursuit of ultimate power, but toward the healing of its world. The first great work of this new age is the restoration of the earth. Using their newfound understanding of frequency and biology, they begin to repair the damage of their industrial age. They learn to sing the song that retunes the polluted oceans, to broadcast the frequencies that encourage the regrowth of the great forests, to cleanse the very air of the carbon that had choked it. It is a planetary scale act of atonement, a conversation with the living systems of their world that their predecessors had mastered, and that they are now relearning. This new, harmonious relationship with the planet brings with it an explosion of creativity and life. Cities are redesigned, no longer grids of concrete and steel that dominate the landscape, but living, symbiotic structures of crystalline materials and bioluminescent flora that are woven into it. They are cities that breathe, that resonate, that hum with the same life-affirming frequencies as the temples of old. The distinction between the artificial and the natural begins to blur. Technology is no longer an imposition upon the world. It is an expression of its own inherent intelligence. The quest for physical immortality is also abandoned, replaced by something far more profound. With their mastery of the resonant science, humanity learns to see the physical body not as a machine to be endlessly repaired, but as a temporary, precious vessel for a consciousness that is eternal. They do not seek to defeat death, but to understand it. The navigators, in their deep communion with the universal field, explore the very process of dying, not as an ending, but as a transition of state, a shedding of form, a conscious return of the individual wave to the cosmic ocean. Death loses its terror and becomes a sacred and final act of reunion. And what of the human spirit? In a world without disease, without war, without the struggle for survival, what becomes of the great engine of human creativity? The fear of existential stagnation, the great malaise that had threatened their golden age, is answered. Humanity discovers that the universe contains an infinity of struggles, an infinity of questions that have nothing to do with mere survival. They turn their gaze and their science outward, but their exploration of the cosmos is not the crude, physical conquest that the inheritors had once dreamed of. They learn, as their predecessors surely did, that the fastest way to travel across the universe is not by moving the body, but by moving the mind. The science of consciousness becomes their starship. The resonance chambers, now perfected, become their observatories, their portals. The navigators become the new astronauts, their consciousness untethered from their physical form, able to journey into the universal field and to witness, directly, the birth of stars in distant galaxies, the swirling beauty of black holes, the very first light of creation itself. They explore not as conquerors, but as artists, as poets, as witnesses to the infinite beauty of the cosmos. Their reports are not data sets, but symphonies of light and geometry, artworks of pure experience that are broadcast back and shared by all of humanity. But they do more than just observe. They learn that the universal field is not just a library. It is a workshop. Consciousness, they discover, is not a passive witness to reality. It is an active participant in its creation. They learn that the universe, at its most fundamental level, is a participatory system, a story that is being co-written by every conscious being within it. And with this final, staggering piece of knowledge, they understand the ultimate purpose of their predecessors, and the final responsibility that has been passed to them, their great final work is not to build a galactic empire or to achieve a static, spiritual perfection. It is to become the new gardeners of the cosmos. Their inheritance was not just the knowledge of how to save themselves, but the duty to help others. They learn to see the signs of emerging life on other worlds, not with telescopes, but by listening for the first faint whispers of nascent consciousness in the universal field. They become the silent, anonymous guardians of 1,000 worlds, using their mastery of resonance to subtly influence the planetary conditions that would allow life to flourish, to protect these young worlds from the cosmic catastrophes that they themselves had once endured. They do not intervene directly. They do not reveal themselves. They understand that every species must find its own path, must make its own choice. They simply tend the garden. They ensure that the soil is fertile, that the rains come, that the cosmic winter is not too harsh. They become the beings that their own myths had once described, the civilization bearers, the silent watchers, the givers of the sacred fire. And in this great act of cosmic stewardship, humanity finds its final and truest purpose. They have broken the cycle of destruction not by transcending their nature, but by embracing its highest potential, the capacity for empathy, for wisdom, and for unconditional love, extended now not just to their own species, but to all life. Everywhere the documentary concludes with a final sequence of images. We see the vibrant, living cities of this new Earth, humming in harmony with a restored and thriving planet. We see the faces of a new humanity, filled not with the frantic ambition of the past, but with a deep, quiet, and joyful presence. We see the navigators in their resonant chambers, their eyes closed, their minds soaring through the star fields of 1 billion galaxies. And we see, on a distant, primordial world, a small, single-celled organism dividing, taking the first tentative step on the long journey toward consciousness, unaware that it is being watched over, protected, and quietly encouraged by the distant descendants of a species that had once almost destroyed itself. The story of humanity did not begin in Sumer. It began in the stars, and it did not end with a choice. It began with one. The echoes of a drowned world have finally been answered, but the conversation with the cosmos is not over. It has just begun. We sought the traces of a civilization that fell, and in doing so, we learned how to build one that could stand. We searched for the ghost of a world that was lost, and in doing so, we found the blueprint for a world that could be saved. The greatest mystery was never whether we were the first. It was whether we would learn from the last. The past is no longer a ghost that haunts us. It is a map that guides us. And the future is no longer a fate to be endured. It is a promise we are finally learning how to keep.